Most of us grow up with a clear idea of what a successful career looks like. You study, you get a job, you work your way up. In the creative industry, that usually means starting as a junior and ending as a creative director. In other words, moving from doing the work to managing it. But how do you actually know if that path is right for you? What alternatives do you have? And what's the reason that a big percentage of creatives end up freelancing? For today's conversation about linear career paths, we are joined by Alice Cutter. She is a community and culture builder who has spent the last decade helping creative teams and individuals design more inspiring ways to work and live. Hi, Alice. Before we get started, can you introduce yourself and what you do in more detail?
Yes, hello. Thanks for having me. My name is Alice. I'm the founder of Out of Office Network, and I'm also a consultant helping teams and individuals work better together, feel more inspired. As you mentioned, I'm doing that in very many different forms, very on theme for today's conversation. So I'm originally from Austria and then have been living across New York, London, now live in Barcelona, and have had the chance to work with a lot of really inspiring companies in different capacities and forms. And then have also started my own company and creative network, which is called Out of Office Network, where I'm running different programming and also helping people and individuals really help them figure out how to approach their lives in like an way that's making them feel more inspired and more energized in the way they live and work. And doing lots of different things around that to help them find ways to do things differently.
Wow, okay. That sounds really interesting. I can't wait to hear the details. But before we get into that, what's your background? Like, what did you study?
Yeah, so I actually studied psychology, and then because I did an Erasmus in Barcelona, I actually found that path into marketing psychology and brand marketing world, which got sparked by like a professor who just like had a really interesting class here in Barcelona. And then after that, when I returned to Austria to finish my studies, I really got drawn to, rather than going into like the clinical psychology, get more into marketing psychology. And so I moved to Vienna. I did like a sales and marketing course at the University of Vienna, like the WU Wien, and then started an agency. So kind of, took like an unconventional step already from psychology into the agency world. And then built my next like 5 or so years. I worked in brand marketing, social media, which was just like hitting off the ground at that time. And did like strategy, social brand work.
Wow, okay.
That's kind of how
So,
it started.
so, so yeah, okay. So the more linear way, if we more the so-called linear way would be like clinical psychology from when you like
Yeah.
study
I mean,
psychology. Is that the linear path?
there are different fields. Like, you can, as much as with when you study law, for instance, you have all these different like paths of law. But when you, for instance,
Hmm.
study psychology, you can go into like clinical psychology, which was my first intention to do. Like, actually, I wanted to do children's psychology, but then I moved into more of like So there's also like I don't know what it's really called as a field, but like more the HR route where you go. It's more like work psychology, which at that time was still very, very small, and no one really in my field went into that, because also the university in Graz is actually very clinical. So the path would have really been going into like the psychology, to go very much into like the diseases, learning more about the brain and learning how to cure things. So much more like in a medical sort of way. But that didn't really speak to me, as I just figured out I would just be too empathetic and too much like suffering in my own being as well to go through all these journeys myself. And I felt drawn to another field that felt more creative and alive. And so, that's kind of what I followed.
Mm. You mentioned that job that you did afterwards, like the
Hmm.
field that you got into wasn't very well known in a way.
Hmm.
How do you like, how do you, okay. I really need to think of the question, like to say it right. How do you end up in a position like that? In the sense of if that's not really a well-known career path, I believe that it's extremely difficult to get there unless you have like a really deep tunnel vision that this is where I want to go. And even if it doesn't exist, I'm gonna like, I don't know, I'm gonna manifest it into existence in a way.
Yeah.
Is this kind of like
Yeah.
how it went or?
That's a really good question. I actually wanted to initially go. So when I, after working in Austria, where I did work at like a more strategic brand, so it was like a brand strategy consultancy. And I was basically like a part-time assistant there. So I was able to learn a lot from it was really a really small agency. It was literally like the founder, another person and me. And they were part of like a bigger network that was, I forgot the name of it, but it was like a bigger network of like brand marketing agencies. And so I learned a lot from working very closely with the second person who was on the team, who did basically like all the work. And then after that, moving to London, I kind of had to like start again because I didn't know anyone there. And I just was really running from one building to the next in this like very hip looking area, and just went to talk to the front desk and just like asked like, hey, I'm looking for an internship. Is anyone looking for anyone? And kind of randomly, because I was just walking in, at some point I landed on the first floor of the agency where it wasn't the front desk anymore, but it was actually like people working in there. And two people saw me like standing out there and being like looking for someone. And so they came over and asked me like what I'm looking for. And I told them like I'm actually looking for an internship. And so they let me drop my resume with them. And so then, in fact, I got like an interview, and that was really in brand strategy still. But then, as I said, like at that time, social media really started to pick up. So actually, my role turned a lot more into also thinking about like social and campaigns around that. And then the internship finished at some point, and then I was looking for like an actual job. And that was when I got my job, because on one hand I was a German speaker, because they were actually looking for someone who was German speaking. And then what they told me afterwards, what really got me the role, actually, because it was such a new role and like the company wasn't even, I guess, entirely sure what they were looking for. And I didn't really have an experience in that field. It was mostly because they said what I did actually back in Vienna was I joined all these events and communities that did marketing things. So it was actually a kind of community at that time called Marketing Natives. I don't know if you were familiar with them or if this still exists, but at that time it was like super new. And it was this group that hosted these like monthly or so events. And I was like a member of them. And so I think the recruiter was basically impressed that I did things outside of work that were showing my interest in that field, and that was showing that I was doing something like just really pure out of interest and like self knowledge and self growth, to invest into that space. And so that was what kind of like got me the role. That's what they told me afterwards.
Oh, okay. So you were just planting seeds here and there, and
Yeah,
then it like came into fruition. Okay, wow.
yeah,
Um, that's such a cool, non-conventional career path, I would say, and also like super non-linear. I would like to just go back a little bit to linear career paths before we get into the non-linear career paths, which you already showed is also a way to do it. And but I think that when we start out, especially, that's when most people think of a career as very traditional or conventional. I think even in the creative space, like you usually start out as an intern. Like at some point you end up being on that ladder. Um, can you can you describe to us what a successful career looked like for you when you started out studying? Because I believe you probably didn't have in mind where you're gonna end up in the end.
not at all. No. Yeah, I mean, I think I don't know if I really had a clear vision of where I was going at that time, because I feel like even at that time, it wasn't so clear what different paths could look like. I guess my mind was like, okay, well, I'm working in an agency. I'm going to do this like one job that is now, yeah, an internship. Then I'm going to become like a community manager. And then at some point, I want to become like a senior strategist or something like that. I guess that was kind of like what I was initially aiming for. But to me, it was very quickly coming kind of like clear that, so I worked in ad agencies for like a couple of years, like 3 or 5 years or something like that, or maybe even less. But then actually, when I moved to Vienna after having been in London and working in agencies for some time, I started working in another agency, but then very quickly kind of realized that I wasn't really drawn to that like next role that I would even have gotten there in that field, because I just felt like I was drawn to so many other things. So actually, after only like a year or so at that agency, I decided to go part-time, to start testing out what freelancing and what like being self-employed could look like. And so then literally like a month later, I quit fully because I was like, oh, this is great. I love this far more. And so then really that's what really kicked off my, I guess, like field of imagination of like what could be different from like this standard career path, because I think that's when I really started seeing what others are doing. And I feel like, if you're in this agency world, for instance, it's kind of hard often to look outside, because you're always like surrounded by similar people, right? Who work in these like standard career paths, but you don't really see others doing a lot of different things, because the people who we are surrounded by are sort of representing our reality, right? And are like representing what we think is possible. And so when I started being self-employed and started working with different people from different companies and different like sizes of companies, I guess I also started seeing what else is out there, like being a founder. So one of my first clients actually was this like startup, where two guys, literally just like also coming from agency business world, they just decided to build this startup and bootstrap it. And so that was really fun and really inspiring for me to work with them at the beginning. And it suddenly showed me this world of like, oh, you can like do a startup and do this thing, and you don't have to like really, have anything to do that. You can just like make it up, and you can just build something from scratch. And so I think these things started to plant the seeds of like, oh, there's a whole different world out there. And so that kind of like slowly and progressively made me even like always look further. And then after some years of like being self-employed, and working with companies in like brand marketing world, I then actually kind of switched more into when I moved to New York, because that was another point of wanting to expand my career or wanting to see what's possible, because I felt like a little bit stuck at some point. That's what, again, where I was like, oh, there's a whole other world as well, where, I can be building community programs and do internal culture work where I can apply the skills that I learned in brand marketing, but use them in a different form that is more centered around really like people and community, rather than just like building Instagram followers on a brand page. And that's
Yes.
then what kind of took into out of office and what I'm doing now. So lots of different chapters of my life.
You said that you felt like the next step in the agency would have you didn't feel like there was enough opportunity there to explore other things. So do you feel like the career ladder and going from like one role to the next role is like that holds us back and that it's like limited in some way? And if yes, like in what way does that limit us like from doing other things?
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, it was in some way because I was basically like the only one responsible of the social media strategy and social media management part at that time, because it was still quite early days. I didn't really see why I shouldn't do the whole thing for myself and actually like work on my own terms. And also, I work on the clients that I wanted to work with, because it wasn't also like often the types of clients that I wanted to really work with. And so I just didn't feel inspired by the work that I was doing. And so I think that was for me like the main reason why I was like, this is not really feeling right for me. I want to explore something else. Um, and I don't know, just going to another agency doing a similar thing didn't really feel very attractive at that time either. And I feel like it was such a small bubble that, I didn't really feel like, oh, wow, there's a new interesting world out there that I want to be part of. And so I kind of just felt like I had to create my own world.
So it also bothered you a little bit that you were building something for somebody else, right?
Mm, not necessarily like building for something else, but I guess like I feel like I couldn't really expand myself in the way that I wanted to. And couldn't really get the opportunities that I wanted to be part of. And yeah, it just felt like it doesn't like expand me. It just felt like I'm kind of stuck in the same thing.
Yeah, I think that's like a personality trait that most people have or have to like then build their own thing,
Yeah.
is that you somehow feel limited or held back by employment because
Yeah.
of, you don't get to make those choices that you would want to make yourself. And I mean,
Yeah,
that
like
was a big reason why I didn't enjoy it. Like I did a couple of internships and that was it. I never went into like a traditional employment because I knew I wouldn't enjoy it. Just from the internships, I was already annoyed that I couldn't make the decisions the way that I wanted to make them and
Yeah.
work with the people that I wanted to work with.
I
yeah.
was way less radical there. Like I thought, okay, this is just something I have to endure, and then at some
Mm.
point it's gonna get better. But spoiler alert, it didn't really get better, at least for me. And then I like completely abandoned my career path and just like started something new. So it's a little bit different to you, but I feel like we do connect in a way because you have like a common thread like going through all of your story. And I feel like I have that too. Like I always stayed connected to design in one way or the other, even though I'm doing more like programming now. But overall, I was also like very connected to the thread of creativity. Like I wanted to stay in this industry. I like the industry. I like what it can give, but I
Yeah.
just didn't like the conventional or the traditional career path that was kind of like destined upon you when you finish
Right.
with your studies. Um, one question about like the creative career ladder in general, because I feel like many creatives like end up going freelance because they don't really fit this conventional system. I would just call it like that. Do you feel like this whole career ladder for creatives has become outdated? Like, I feel like the work has the work has changed, like the world has changed and the work has changed, and you don't really like want to go up one step, like one step after the other. You're more like what you said, you want to expand your knowledge. And I feel like, especially in the creative industry, a lot of people are very multifaceted. Like, you don't just like, oh, I really love this one specific um I don't know, niche in design. I actually like more and I like to expand my knowledge. So do you feel like, so to go back to my original question, do you feel like the traditional career ladder is outdated for creatives?
100%. I mean, I think there's a couple of different aspects that come in there. Like, I think on one hand, there's things like the industry or the creative work in general is changing a lot with like, especially AI and things like that. It's just like shifting a lot. There's new skills that people need. There's new ways creative work gets approached, right? Like, there's not this traditional path anymore. And I think on the other hand, as you mentioned, like a lot of creatives are actually multi-hyphenates. They love doing like multi-passionate people who love doing like a lot of different things. And I think that for me was definitely also like one of the reasons why I guess I kind of stuck to self-employment, because it just opens up so many different doors to doing a lot of different things where, you can collaborate with a lot of different people, you can work on different projects, you can experiment a lot. And so that is really fun for, I think, like many creatives who have this need to do that and to try different things in a different way and also want to like find themselves or rediscover themselves in different forms. And I think I mean, I do feel like not, freelance is not the solution for everyone. And I think also luckily there's more and more models that kind of start to shift where people can set themselves up in different forms. Like people are starting to, I mean, agencies are actually starting to become much more fluent and flexible, also working more with people on like a freelance or contract or fractional capacity. And then there's a lot of people who form kind of like these agency groups with friends or other collaborators that also, again, like gives you a little bit of a different setup than just being like freelance, right? And so I think there's, luckily like a lot of new forms where people can experiment with what fits for them and what feels right. And I think what you said, like it's nice to have to have a sense for what your red thread is, like what you kind of feel is the right path for you in the sense of like what you enjoy doing and what it is that you love and what you feel like is giving you a sense of like enjoyment and aliveness in the way you work and or in the way that you experiment, and then just doing different setups kind of like around that is like a nice way to stick to something in some form but then also find other ways to do that. And I guess what also gets a lot of people to do more like the freelance or fractional or so role is that a lot of people also start actually wanting to do a couple of different things that are not necessarily all like even the same type of work, right? Like for me, for instance, I work with companies and I work with individuals and I design like programs where I work with like tech companies or design companies or creative networks. And that's like one part of my work. And so that's kind of like depending, but like sometimes a 3-day a week setup, or sometimes like there's a couple of months where I do like 4 days or even full time. And then I don't work on that type of project for like another couple of months. At the same time, I'm also building out of office where I'm running a community cohort where I'm basically like running this course or teaching people how to set their setups up in a right way that feel right for them, like set their work and life setup up in a way that's right for them. And also now I started doing these creative experiences with artists in Barcelona where people can actually like tap into what creativity looks like in their everyday and practice more of that. And that's like a lot of different things. And if I had like a full-time job, it would be really hard to fit all of those things in. But because I'm self-employed, I can kind of like scale back and so I can upscale and downscale and I can move around that. And that allows me to have all these different parts of myself that I love, bringing them into my life. And I think a lot of people, I've been seeing that a lot recently where, people have a lot of interests and passions if they have space to think about them and explore them. And it's really nice to bring that into your life. And so, a lot of people don't necessarily want to work in a full-time capacity at their office chair all week, all day long, because then there's not a lot of time left for doing other like little endeavors or even ventures on the side as well. And so that's, I think, what a lot of people find very interesting about like going self-employed or freelance, that there's like much more space to be flexible around the different passions that you have and the different interests, and just try to find like a setup. There's a term of like portfolio life or portfolio career, where you basically see your life as like I don't know, it can be a pie, and you have these different parts of the pie. And, maybe like freelance work is one, but then there's also a lot of other stuff. Maybe there's an online cohort that you're hosting, or maybe there's like a retreat series that you're running. And so I think it's really nice for people as work shifts to think about like their lives and their work as a more holistic thing where they can just like put different parts into it rather than just like their whole workday or life being occupied by this one thick block of like traditional kind of like work that is not really giving them maybe like the variety and the different aspects that they would actually like to have in their lives.
I completely agree with an asterisk, um, which is that one thing that a traditional path does give you, sometimes even more than the non-conventional one, I would say, is that usually it gives you it gives you financial security,
Yeah,
maybe more so than what you mentioned, because building something like that up takes like a lot of conviction, a lot
for
of
sure.
time, a lot of passion, and not everyone is equipped to do that. Even though they might want to, but they have like some real responsibilities and financial struggles maybe that prevent them to do that stuff. So since you've been working with creatives and making them like build their like dream lives and dream careers, what do people come to you for? Like people working in those traditional setups, what what are their main problems and what prevents them to moving into the direction that would probably benefit them more mentally,
Uh,
even if maybe not financially in the beginning?
yeah. I think there's maybe like two different things. Like one thing is people who are kind of like they sort of know what they are interested in or sort of know that they have something that they're excited about, but they can't really see the structures of like what a different path to build that could look like, giving there's a real financial, I mean, the first question that you need to ask yourself that I also like start with all my programs and everything is, what does success actually mean to you, and what do you need in your life, right? Like what are the basic requirements that you need, even at like, I mean, that's like from psychology coming, like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, there's like basic needs that you have and you need to make sure that they're covered. Like you need to feel safe, meaning also financially safe, like financial stability. Like you need to be aware of how much you need. So an exercise could even be, like calculate like how much do you actually need per month, or per year, and what is like the basic requirement that you actually need to make. And then figure out like, what do you need to do in order to get that? Maybe that's like a part-time job, right? Like it doesn't need to be, don't need to start out as like full-time freelance creative going completely rogue, but it's just something where you need to figure out like what is the basic need that you have and how can you cover that. I think that's like very important, because otherwise I think also you could very easily get into this like scarcity mindset where you're just scrambling and kind of like desperate to not you just feel like, oh my God, I'm always behind and I'm never having enough. And that's like really difficult to operate from. And I think also it's very difficult to get opportunities into your life if you are in that mindset. You need to be in an abundance mindset, meaning like you really need to be like, everything is possible. I'm not feeling competition or anything like that, right? Like it shouldn't be in your head that you're like, oh my God, this other person also does that. So I need to make sure that I'm being faster. Like if you operate from that mode, you're going to burn out as well, because that's just like not sustainable. I think it's really important to feel comfortable in yourself, to be like good about like, where you set up and how things work. And of course, in every new journey, there's a little bit of like, I mean, there's some time where you need to figure things out. Like it won't happen from one day to the other, right? It also takes time. So I think it's good to have a bit of a financial pillow to be aware, okay, cool. I can do 6 months or 3 months without like being completely desperate or completely broke. And so what is that pillow that you can give yourself to start experimenting? And then also say, okay, well, if it didn't work for 6 months, and if after 6 months, I'm still in a place where I'm actually not able to operate from something and you cannot afford it further, then also be realistic and be like, okay, well, maybe I need to get a job again, or maybe I need to start a part-time contract or whatever it is, finding a setup that kind of works. Um, Now I forgot the question. Where was
Me
I
too.
going with this?
Wait a minute.
It was
Wait,
it
what the
was
fuck?
I remember the
Okay, thank
question.
God.
The question was what are the challenges that people
Oh
have
yeah, right.
typically,
Thank you.
and how do you help them overcome those
Right.
challenges?
Yeah. So I think, it's this like first one of like, okay, what is the setup that I could do that works for me? And I guess like opening up people's awareness around that, of like, what are new possibilities for them within to get to that place that is like really where they want to be. And also I think very often, I think a lot of people, and that's probably like the most common thing, they have a feeling that something's not right, but they don't necessarily 100% know what it is. Like they have this thing that they think they like and would love to lean more into, but they don't really manage yet to like express that. And I think that's like something where the program in the programs that I'm running, there's a lot around like doing things in community and getting words from other people and language from other people, and that helps you really define like what it is that you're feeling, like put this into more like reality. And so I think that's very helpful for people to then build their next steps. Like it doesn't need to be a venture. It can also be just like then going into like a different career path, right? Because even that, like you don't need to jump into self-employment. Like there's also just like the possibility of going into like another slightly different career if the one that you're following doesn't feel right. And so it's I think just about like naming that and being able to express it for yourself, like with the help of other people. And then I think the other version that's like similar but a little bit different is just like people who are just so stuck in their career, or they're just like feeling so burnt out that they can't even like see beyond what's possible anymore. And so there's a lot about like opening up a sense of possibility for people. And that is, for instance, like why I run. So one part of Out of Office is also a newsletter where I interview people like once a month about different ways of creative living, what I call it. So basically showing how people live their lives in different ways. And that can be from like artists, it can be people who decided to move to the countryside, people who decided to open up like a different studio or whatever it is, and just like different forms of doing things in a way that is not like following the traditional path. So yeah, it's just like opening up people's horizon and kind of like aperture around like what is possible for themselves, and what are different paths that people follow, so they can maybe, take like a glimpse of something and be like, oh, this is something I've been thinking about. Like maybe that is something I can integrate into my day. So it's not necessarily about, oh, okay, now I'm also gonna move to the countryside and open up like something else. It's more just like giving people an idea to see what others did so they can maybe take something for themselves and figure out like that's a version of a life that they would also be interested in building.
Actually, what you said in the beginning about having the basic needs met is so relatable because when we started out, I remember I was still on unemployment money, and that was like just about covering my basic needs. And I remember telling you like, okay, if I could just make that amount of money for even just for a year, like I can live on this. But
Mhm.
I give myself approximately half a year to a year to at least make the amount of money that I got from unemployment and obviously more. But that was kind of my needs. And with that, my need was met. And another thing was like, you also mentioned like kind of like a naive component to it that you cannot really think about your competition or where others are in the moment. You kind of have to look at yourself and what you can do. And this is also kind of how we started. We went into it, I wouldn't say blindly exactly, but not with a lot of like competitor analysis or like whatever overthinking you could do in the beginning. We just like started out and hoped for the best because we knew that this path forward was more likely to benefit us mentally and career wise than the traditional path would have.
Yeah. I also really liked what you said about like it doesn't have to be either or. Like you don't have to jump into full like self-employment because that's kind of what I did initially after university was go like full self-employment. But then I think I was in that phase of like being too stressed out about having to make money that I then didn't
Mhm.
have the capacity to then actually do the things that I needed to do to get to my goals. So then I started a part-time position where then my basic needs were met because it was enough money for what I needed to live. And then that freed up my mind to work on the things, the steps that I needed to work on to actually reach my goal. And I thought that's really relatable. And I think a lot of people out there do that something similar. And because that fear of having to, make enough money every month as being self-employed, it can really take over your mental capacity to actually be creative and do the work.
Totally.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
a lot of creatives go that route, and I think it's really good to do it that way because you then have, on the one hand, you have security, but you also aren't doing like a 40-hour week where you then have no time to think about the other
Right.
stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. And also, I mean, it takes time to, build a client network and to go out there and put yourself out there. And so that's not just happening from one day to the other. And so I think it's nice to, yeah, I mean, there's different, it depends on whatever feels right for one. But I feel like there's different ways to do that. And if you feel like you just want to take it a little slower and don't want to like start it off fully right away, it's also very nice to actually have a part-time job, or which is what I did as well, actually. Like I started part-time, as I mentioned, like I went part-time and then quit very quickly because also it kind of took off very quickly for me. I was really lucky at that time. And so, but it was really nice to be part-time and still, not go in fully and be completely like maybe overwhelmed with what is happening, but actually take my time to like build opportunities, and then things come along and then one thing built on the other. And so that's kind of like how everything got rolling. But I think it's important to be aware of that too. And not because someone else, started their freelance career and then hit it off and made more than they did before. You hear those stories all the time, right? But that doesn't mean it's going to happen for everyone. And that doesn't mean you have to do it that way. So I think it's nice to be aware of that and not compare yourself to how others do things as well.
Yeah, you mentioned also that going freelance isn't like the only way that you can emancipate yourself from
Mhm.
the career path that you were on. What are other ways for creators to, yeah, to change their career path but still stay in the creative industry without going freelance?
Yeah. Yeah. So there's different kind of like models that are still within the traditional, let's say, way of working. Also, like as a creative, like there could be, for instance, fractional work, which basically means you are kind of like in the setup of a company, like you're having like a role in some form, but you're not a full-time employee. So you're actually part of the company, you're part of like the culture, the meetings and all that stuff that comes with it, and part of like integrated in the work and integrated in teams, which is something that a lot of people really enjoy and can be really nice. But you're still having some form of like freedom, or are not fully dependent on that. And so you're almost taking like a bit of an executive sort of like role for some time, where you're stepping in and you're taking on the responsibilities, but yeah, still on your own terms in some form, or it's like a contract that's like limited to a certain amount of time. So it's not like this, okay, I'm there now for the whole future. Um, so that is, for instance, a setup. Then there's also and you can do that, for instance, a lot of people do fractional, like, 3 days a week or 4 days a week. So it's typically also not necessarily like a full-time engagement, which again leaves you room for doing other things as well. That could be like more client work, or it could just be like other stuff outside of work. Then there's people who, for instance, create like a collective. So in a book, I wrote a book called Reimagining the Nature of Work, where I kind of break down all these different models, where collectives, for instance, are one. And in my book, I interviewed 2 different collectives who work in like different setups. And so that could be a group of people who just like come together and then build out a structure for themselves, but they're all independent and all like self-employed in that structure. But they create things like, like rituals and routines around work. So they have like team meetings, so they have like annual reflection meetings and annual reports. They can approach clients together. So it's not just like as an individual, but actually as a group. And so also that can give you a lot more like security, but also just more like community and people around you to figure things out together with. Um, then there's kind of more like the seasonal approach to work, which could be something like, for instance, you take on a contract for like a long term, like 6 months or whatever. And then maybe that makes you enough money to not work for like 2 months, and then you start something else again. So it's more like doing that in like a different form. Um, as a creative, you can easily do that. Like you can structure around that. Like sometimes, for instance, many people say they want to take the summer off. So they're working on something until like the summer, then take like a month or two break or longer if they feel like it, and then do like another thing afterwards. And so I think those are like some models, for instance, that are quite interesting for people to explore, and that I feel like also coming up more and more, where it's just like people and companies are also actually from a company side looking for different setups. Like not every company can and wants to hire people in a full-time capacity. So a lot more of these contract roles come up, which I think is like a really, I love that development. I think it's like a very healthy approach to letting people work in like a different form. And so, yeah, there's like more ways people can actually like still be part of that kind of work world and work in like the creative industries on like more the traditional work, but like in a different form and in a different mode of work.
That's it's really interesting that you say that, because that you mention all of these different forms of where you can be independent but still with a team, or like you can go
Hmm.
completely freelance. Like you don't have to give up one thing or the other. You can find other forms of work. One thing I find really interesting, though I'm not sure if you had the experience with freelancers like that, but oftentimes we find ourselves recreating the systems that we know. Meaning that, for example,
Hmm.
the 9 to 5, okay, so we are freelance now, but we kind of like, okay, we kind of like imitate what we already know. And I think that many people then even find unhappiness in a way with
Hmm.
freelance, because they like just try to recreate
Mm,
the role that they had, because that's what they know.
totally.
And what do you suggest for people who like feel stuck in their freelance Alltag, freelance day to day,
Daily life, yeah.
that yeah, day to day, that kind of just like recreate what they knew, and how can they create their own day to day without having the feeling of losing security? Because what a system gives you is a sense of security, even if it's
Hmm.
false, like doesn't really
Yeah.
matter, but it's there and it gives you like a net.
Yeah. I think I mean, I've in the interviews, for instance, that I do with people as well, there's like lots of different inspirations around that, where I feel that has also inspired me to kind of like think about it in a different form. So, for instance, like one person that I recently spoke to, she actually like moved to the countryside because she used to live in Berlin and then moved to the countryside And she felt like, okay, the agency set up as it was, and she was self-employed, like didn't work for her. And so she, for instance, like started to also like take some time out of the year where she was not working, or she was like rethinking in a way that like how to structure the day. Like, for instance, some people know when, or I think you can like, notice when your brain works best and when you kind of like are not really in a work mode. And so that might be looking very similar from a day to day if you actually like observe it, or it might also depend on what your day feels like. But I think one thing is like actually giving yourself permission to kind of like listen to that and then design your day around that. So for instance, someone might actually not be fully like on in the morning first thing, right? And like actually be much more productive if you first go like on a walk in the morning, and then or do sports in the morning, get your brain going, and then maybe start your day at like 10 or 11 rather than right away at like 9 a.m. or something. And so other people are, for instance, like I'm myself right now mostly just work in the mornings because I'm spending like most of my afternoons with my daughter now because I want to like have more time with her in the afternoon as well. So I work during the morning hours, and then in the afternoon, sometimes do some meetings, but I don't really do a lot of laptop work. And so I think, just listening to what it is that you need and then finding like a structure around that works for you. And that could be just something small, like literally a morning walk or something that breaks you out of this, like having to start the day right away on the computer and getting things done, and actually gives you the freedom to like listen and to think about something. Or it could be something like, I don't know, maybe, creating something with a friend or with a group of people. So for instance, it could be that you say, let's do like a co-work coffee meeting every Thursday, whatever it is, together to also like get out of this like stuckness. Cause I feel like, as you mentioned, like a lot of people are just like, okay, I just need to go to my laptop and work. Also, even though they might not have work that is like filling the whole week yet or at that moment, but it's just like how our brains think like, oh, I need work, so I need to sit on my computer and do something. But actually, if you think about it, like, how do you get most work? It's by talking to people, it's by opening up some opportunity, by having an encounter, and that person thinks like, oh, actually, I need this and that. And so it's about like meeting people, going out there. And so how can you build a structure around that allows you, that creates accountability for yourself as well? And so I think like community and people are very important for that. Like, for instance, yeah, setting up like a Thursday co-work with one or two other friends who are maybe also self-employed or who work remotely, and you can sit together and just like exchange ideas and like just do a little bit of idea sparing and just like do some co-work together. So creating some structures that allow you to not fall back into this like traditional 9 to 5 mode of working.
Yeah, I feel like I struggle with that still. Like, I don't know, for me, it's like I'm not super productive in the morning, but I force myself to be productive in the morning because I don't want to work at night, even though that's when
Hmm.
I would be productive. But I really don't want to sit
Yeah,
there at 10 and
right.
code a website. I want to do that before. But I do notice that I'm working against my own energy. And we
Mm.
recently had someone on the podcast as well that, especially for people who menstruate, that they also like follow a different
Hmm.
um
Energy.
different energy, like, yeah,
Yeah,
that which you have to adapt, like, probably weekly, depends on the phase
yeah,
that you're in. And that also kind of opened my eyes to understanding, okay, why isn't my energy linear? It's also like more non-linear, and it depends on the week,
totally.
what I'm best at.
Changes a lot.
It
Yeah,
changes a lot, exactly. Like for example, right now, the current phase is that I'm pretty much brain fogged and therefore working against my energy. But there's like stuff that you have to do. Like
right.
we planned this conversation. I can just move it because I'm in a specific phase of my period. So it's also kind of like
I
fine.
mean, yeah, I
Yeah,
think, yeah, it's finding a balance, right? Like you can
exactly.
move things, like, right? I think there's things that can be moved, and then there's things that probably shouldn't be moved. So I think it's also, we do think nothing should be moved or can be moved, but then it is possible. And so I think also, maybe just like being not too strict with us and just being a little bit more gentle with like, okay, I think to be honest, like for me, when I became a mom, that was like a big game changer, because I think it's often difficult for us to just, because we've been taught that, right? Like, no, everything is important. We have to be professional. We have to have our stuff together, and we can't reschedule a meeting or whatever. But then suddenly when I became a mom, I was like, okay, my time is so spare. Like I really need to be very, very sure this is actually important and meaningful to me. And I don't want to just like waste hours on calls. Like, and so really I reduced my calls a lot, and I still really often have to get back to people saying like, I'm sorry, I don't have the capacity right now. I need to like either reschedule or like things that are not, also, I mean, to be honest, like often you need to be like, okay, what is making you money and what doesn't? What is marketing for you? What is not? Like, what is, I mean, I'm sure you still want to have calls where people are just like, there's people reaching out and asking things, and you want to still like be helpful to people, but you also need to be quite like, what can you do right now to still feel good about yourself and have time for the things that are important for you. So I think it is quite, if there's someone else coming in making you rethink that, it's much easier, because it's like, okay, like literally I have to take care of a human. Like I can't just be like, oh, sorry, I have another call. And that is changing a lot. And that's like a really good filter. And I wish we'd be able, or maybe there's a way, we'd be able to do that for ourselves without having someone who's like kind of applying that to us or like helping us go through this. Or maybe everyone needs like their own version of learning that, right? Like, and maybe there's like a form of thinking about what a version of learning that could be for yourself, where like what is really important in a week, like what are the meetings that are maybe not even needing to be a meeting. Maybe there's like, the other day actually someone also was getting back to me and were like, sorry, I have like an 8-hour meeting day, like let's do a voice note and let's just voice note back and forth. And that can also replace an hour conversation on Zoom, right? Like you can find different ways to do things. And so I think it's just like important to rethink that and then suggest like another way of keeping that conversation going or doing that project work that you had to do. Maybe it's asking someone else to do it. Maybe it's like, yeah, shifting it to another day, but there's definitely some flexibility around. But we often think there's not, but it's just like, okay, how can I approach that differently?
Yeah, for sure. Actually, I think this is a very good way to end the conversation.
There's one
I
last
want,
thing I
yeah,
wanted to ask,
okay.
because I think it's relevant to people who are in a linear career path and also people who are in a non-linear career path. Because you mentioned it very briefly, like at the beginning of the episode, that AI is changing things. And just like, I just wanted to ask you, like, what do you mean by that exactly? Like, why do you feel like AI is changing things? And what are things that, like, younger creatives or people, starting their career need to think about in that sense?
hmm Yeah. I mean, I feel like with AI, especially right now, it's changing a lot of things in the sense that people, I mean, for instance, in the creative industries or specifically for designers, I think the role of a designer is shifting a lot. It's going a lot away from this like just using one tool and editing graphics or whatever it is to actually being much more like strategic, because a lot of the like manual work will get replaced from AI. And that's not a bad thing in a way where, a lot of manual things that can be done much faster can be replaced by tools. And I think it's about like thinking about how can we also now use our brains in a way that the tools don't work yet. And so I think the role of a designer, for instance, yeah, is shifting a lot more into like being more strategic about things and being more of like a creative director almost in some form, rather than just like executing things. And I think that's really amazing, where you also have new possibilities to grow in like new forms and can use tools in a way that just like maybe you weren't able to do things before. And so that kind of like makes a bit of a chain reaction, right? Where some roles and some jobs will probably in a couple of years not necessarily exist anymore. But then there will be a lot of other amazing jobs that will come up where you might use your brain in a very different form. And maybe it's much more about like what you can imagine and what you can, like create, or how you can communicate with people, how you can brief things. So that's like definitely changing. And I think I mean, from that's not like I don't have any specific stats on that. There's actually an amazing report. I haven't read it yet, but it's on my wanting to read list from Designer Fund. They just created an AI report about like the creative industries, and I've seen some glimpses, and it looks really interesting. And I'm sure they talk about this a lot. But just like some of the things that I'm seeing as well is that also just like the way companies hire like junior talent versus more like experienced talents. I think also in just like my work sphere, I see that a lot right now where it's more difficult sometimes for more like senior people to get hired because they often also have a higher rate. And a lot of the investment of money often just goes into like very specific AI related things. And so maybe that rate can't be justified anymore. And they often just kind of hire more like junior people, more like mid-career people. Um, on the other side of the spectrum with juniors, I think there is, on one hand, companies still hire because it's also just like lower fees, so more feasible for them to hire. But then also I think like AI and those tools do replace a lot of these tasks that maybe more junior people used to get hired for, right? So it's not necessarily like a clear direction of where this is going and how these are things, but those are just like some observation points that I've made and heard from people. And so I think it's going to be interesting like to see how that plays out and how things change like in the next couple of months and years as well.
Yeah, I think that's like really interesting because for me, like intuitively, I think it makes sense that AI would replace juniors since it's like work that doesn't require a lot of like strategic thinking and knowledge. But then
Mhm.
again, like you said, like the issue is that the seniors are too expensive, probably. So there's like I
Yeah.
guess companies are probably also struggling to find a balance. And I think
Yeah.
that for us as creatives and people starting their career, it's important to like be flexible, I guess, and
Yeah.
kind of, because we don't know where it's going yet. So it's gonna
Totally.
be interesting to, like you said, to observe and yeah, and then adjust accordingly.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
found it
And I think
interesting that
also
you
to learn,
Yeah.
to like
yeah,
just
and
be, experiment and try things and really, yeah, make AI your friend as well, rather than just like being scared of it and figuring out like how to use it in a way that's like fun and interesting and even like usable for yourself. I mean, there's so many ways you can also, outsource a lot of the stuff that you used to having to do. Coming back to the conversation before, right? Like, what are the things that maybe even AI can do for you? That's like email follow ups and all that stuff. Like, there's so much, and being like a bit of a personal assistant. So yeah, I think there's like a lot that's changing in that way as well.
Yeah, I guess there's also opportunity there to use AI in a way to then create a less linear day to day because
Yeah,
then you don't have to do those mundane tasks anymore that you
totally.
would usually
Yeah,
do like at the beginning of the day to start your 9 to 5 or whatever.
absolutely. Yeah.
And it frees up time to then do that walk in the morning or whatever it
Yeah,
is that you need to do to get creative and feel
yeah.
less like caught in that structure.
Totally. Do yoga and let Claude do all your background preparing your
Exactly.
day in the meantime.
Exactly.
love that.
Okay, so as a final question, like looking at your own path and like how you got to where you are now, um, if you were to go back and like talk to your younger self, is there something
Mm.
you would tell your younger self like to do differently, or do you feel like everything kind of fell into place the way it should have, and you would just do it the same way again? Or maybe some advice that it would have made your life easier.
um, I mean, I think in some way I've had so many different micro paths and so many different ways. And I think that really allowed me to learn so much and just like figure things out along the way. And I guess that's really part of what my path needed. And I guess the one thing I would tell myself and still need to tell myself is definitely that it's also like not easy to do a non-traditional path because there's no one that you really can look up to. Yeah, like you constantly need to reinvent yourself. And also it's like sometimes really hard to communicate what you were doing because it's literally like so many different things. And it's like when I'm coming to a point of like an intro for myself, I'm always like, okay, so where do I even start? Because there's like so many different things. And I think maybe there's like a thing of, yeah, I mean, on one hand, being patient to myself, being kind with myself. And maybe just like, but I don't know if that's really possible, but like maybe earlier on also like ask for more help from people who are just a little bit like older and are just like more can be more of like mentors, because I think I didn't really have that much. I had one mentor, unofficial mentor, and then more later on. But I feel like especially in Austria, I really struggled with that. Like when I moved to the US, it was a little bit easier in some form because I feel like people were a bit more. I guess I encountered more people and just like saw more different ways to do things. So I would maybe challenge myself a little bit earlier on to kind of like find ways to join like a mentorship program or get into some form of like support system that exists for people who are thinking like a little bit differently and want to do things a little bit differently.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice and very relatable for us because we're also like doing so many different things.
Yeah.
So whenever we introduce ourselves, it's also like, where do we start?
Yeah.
Yeah,
So many different ventures.
I think that's like always happens when you have the non-linear path. You end up doing, like you said, like a lot of different things, and you have a lot of different smaller paths. And
yeah,
then, yeah, it's hard to kind of like put it into words.
Yeah. But one
totally,
thing we all have is that common thread, and I feel like you can always connect it
Yeah,
to
that's
it.
always relatable, I think, to anybody who's doing something similar.
totally. Yeah, I think like the nonlinear ones get it, and then if there's like other with the traditional world, it sometimes is like, so what?
Yeah, no, definitely. Like when I
No.
talk to my parents or
Yeah,
like my aunt and uncle, like anyone from like an older generation, they're always like, "Wait, so what do you do?"
Yeah.
Or like, what are you doing exactly? They only really understand the linear part. Like when I talk about our agency, that they understand. But
yeah,
when I talk about all
right.
the other things, they're like, okay,
Yeah.
is it like a hobby or like they're
Yeah.
also not that interested in it because they don't really understand it. So it's yeah, it's funny. Thank you so much for being here and coming on the podcast and telling us about all these different possibilities that are out there for people who are looking for something a little less traditional.
Thank you for having me. It was really fun to talk.